Hi guys, Tessa here. Welcome to my kitchen. We are going to be decorating the rainbow sprinkle cake. So thank you for joining me this morning. I have my cakes baked and ready, my buttercream already made. If you are joining us from home, hopefully you have all of your tools ready and your cake and buttercream ready to go. And I'm going to jump right in and get going on this cake. So I have my cakes baked and they're nice and cool. And I'm going to trim them. So when they baked, sometimes they have a dome on top, sometimes bigger, sometimes smaller, doesn't matter. We are going to make sure these are nice and flat by using our serrated knife and cutting straight across. Just so when we go to stack these up, they're going to be nice and flat, and we're going to have a nice even cake once it's all stacked up. So we'll trim this off using our serrated knife until it detaches. Just trying to make sure it's cut all the way across nice and straight here. So we'll do that with all of our cake layers. I have one already cut. The rest are ready to go over here. Okay, so let's move this one out of the way. I'll show you guys one more time with one of the other cakes. And this is also an opportunity to make sure that all of your cake layers are the same thickness. So again, we'll pop this on here on my rotating turntable. I'm going to take my serrated knife and just start scoring it around the edges here. Just taking little tiny cuts on towards the center instead of going all the way across, because it's really hard to keep your knife level and go all the way across without having it wave through. So we're going to go around the edges here, doing little cuts all the way towards the center. Just keep turning and going until it detaches naturally. And we'll take that off. Put that aside. I'm going to go ahead and just clean off some of my crumbs as I go here, just so we don't get any of those crumbs in our buttercream. So I have 3 layers of our confetti cake, all trimmed and ready to go. So now I'm going to start filling the cake, making sure as I go it's as level as possible, and then we have the same amount of filling between each layer. So when we go and slice our cake layer later, we'll have nice clean layers of cake and filling. So I have my whipped buttercream over here. I'm going to give it one stir real fast. So I had just made my buttercream just before class started, but I want to make sure it's still nice and fluffy. So just give it a little whip in between steps here as needed. Okay, so I have my buttercream. I'm going to go ahead and take a big dollop here. I'm just going to eyeball it today. It's going to be about ½ cup of buttercream. We want to make sure that we are saving enough to fill our cake and to decorate later. So that's why it's a pretty large batch of buttercream, but it will help us save enough for that rainbow buttercream border later. So I have a nice ½ cup, 3/4 cup of buttercream on top here. I have my small offset spatula, so I'm just going to go ahead and start smoothing that out, pushing it towards the edges of the cake, and then rotating my stand at the same time to make sure that it's nice and flat. And because we're using the same filling as frosting today, we don't have to worry as much about the filling seeping out. So if I was using a different type of filling, I might do a buttercream dam, but because we are using the same filling as frosting, that's not really a concern today. So as we keep building, I'm going to make sure that each layer is nice and level and nice and flat. That just makes it so much easier when I go to frost my cake later. I already know everything is stacked up nice and even, and I'm not trying to fuss with it too much. So I'm going to take my cake that I just trimmed, I'm going to flip it upside down, and then I'm going to press it together here just to make sure that it's nice and flat. We're already off to a great start, nice and level. So I'll take my buttercream again, give it a big dollop on top, You can measure this with a measuring cup if you're not comfortable eyeballing. You can use like a ice cream scoop or cookie scoop. That also works well. Again, I'm using my offset spatula. I'm going to start pushing it towards the edges of the cake. And then I'll start spinning and smoothing it out, letting my tools really work for me. And again, because we're using the same filling as frosting, it's okay that some of the frosting is going to hang out over the edges, and that's going to actually help us with our crumb coat here in the next step. So everything is nice and flat. I'm going to take my last layer of cake. This is the one I trimmed before class started. So it's wrapped up here in plastic. And what I always like to do, especially for this top layer of cake, is I like to flip it upside down, because this side that's cut might have more crumbs than, say, this side that came out of the pan. And we always know, no matter what, even though we trimmed this nice and flat, this side is always going to be super flat because it was in the pan. So I always flip it upside down, and then we'll press it down. And like right now is a really good chance to see if your cake is nice and level. If it's leaning at this point, you can push it back, because you don't want to wait until you've frosted your cake to notice if it's leaning, because then it's just going to make things a little bit more tricky to get back on track and clear out some crumbs too. Okay. So I have my buttercream, and I'm going to add another large dollop to the very top of the cake right here. And I'm going to be icing the cake in a very thin layer of this buttercream, which is called a crumb coat. And what that's going to do is trap in all the little crumbs in it so they don't get into our final layer of buttercream. We want to make sure that they get trapped in now with this very thin layer of buttercream. And then it'll make sure that your final layer is nice and clean. So I'm just pushing the frosting out towards the edges of the cake as I'm turning. And then I'm going to keep my offset spatula as still as possible right here, and then spin to flatten it out. And you can see I'm not moving my arm, or I'm not moving the arm that's holding the spatula, and I'm just letting the tools work for me, and everything's getting nice and flat all on its own. So this is going to be the similar steps to what we're going to work on later when we're doing the final coat, but this is just the crumb coat for now. So it's kind of like the sped up brief version of the final layer. So I'm going to go through some of the steps now, but more detail as we get to the final coat. So we have this little overhang of frosting that was pushed out over when we were flattening the top. So the first thing I'm going to do is attach it to the cake, to the sides of the cake here. And this is going to really ensure that we have a nice clean top edge to our cake. So we don't want the edges of our cake to be droopy or rounded. We want to make sure it's like nice and sharp. So having this extra buttercream around the top edge, like a collar here, is really going to make sure that those corners are nice and crisp and not droopy. So just working with any of the buttercream that I already have on the cake, I'm just going to start attaching that and smoothing it to the sides before I add any other buttercream, because this buttercream right here already has some crumbs in it. So we want to keep those crumbs in this layer and not on the outside of the cake. So from here, I'm just going to add a little bit at a time, going for a nice thin layer of buttercream. It does not have to be perfect, but just a nice thin, even layer all the way around to trap in those crumbs. You also want to make sure that we're not introducing crumbs back into our bowl of buttercream. So we have a nice fresh bowl of buttercream. My spatula right now has some crumbs in it from the buttercream that we were just working on the cake. So I want to make sure that this doesn't go back in there and add crumbs to the bowl. So I'm going to scrape this on a different bowl right here. So You want to make sure that you're not adding crumbs back in, because the whole point is to keep the crumbs out. So we have a nice thin layer here all the way around. I'm going to clean off the top edge of the cake. Again, we're going for like nice crisp corners. So what we're going to do is take our offset spatula, and then I'm going to gently pull it towards the center of the cake right here, and then clean that off in between. So just very carefully, because you don't want to smush that edge either. And just go all the way around the cake. So nice and flat. And then we'll just do one more spin around the top. And now we have our nicely crumb coated cake. At this point, I would normally refrigerate the cake for about 15 minutes to really make sure it traps in all those crumbs, it chills nicely, and we have a nice fresh start for our final layer of buttercream. Of course, today, we're not gonna put that in the fridge and wait for 15 minutes, so I am gonna move on. So if you are making a cake at home, remember you want to crumb coat your cake and then chill for about 15 minutes before restarting with the final layer. So with our final layer of cake, I'm gonna start again, very similar to the crumb coat. So I'm gonna make sure I have all this buttercream that had crumbs. I'm gonna set that aside. And I'm gonna start with a pretty large dollop of frosting for the top. We wanna make sure there's enough frosting to frost the top and to go over the edges just a little bit, like I said before, so we have enough frosting to build up that top corner. And then for anyone that's decorating at home, you really want to make sure that we save some of our buttercream for our decoration on top. So actually what I'm going to do is take another bowl, and this is what I'm going to use to color my buttercream later. And I'm just going to take out some of the buttercream right now to make sure that there's enough saved for that decoration. So I'm going to go ahead and put some buttercream in this bowl, and it's going to be about a cup of buttercream. Maybe a little bit more. So we just have to, make sure we're not using all the buttercream on the cake. We can save some for our border for later. I'm just gonna set that aside. All right, so back to our cake. I have a nice big blob of buttercream on top, more than I know that I'll need to frost the top of the cake. But like I said, we want to have extra anyway. So I'm gonna use my spatula just like I did for the crumb coat. Just start pushing that towards the sides of the cake and spinning just to get things started. And then now again, it's really important to just let my tools really work for me. So I'm going to try to hold still with my spatula and then just give this turntable a go. And then it's just going to naturally flatten out just the way we want it to. Isn't that perfect how that works? Really letting those tools work for us. Make sure we have that nice flat top. And then from there, you see all this extra overhang. That's actually a good thing. So we can start by pressing that directly to the sides of the cake. And look there, I have a little crumb that I'm going to just remove. So just again, building that top edge so we have a nice crisp top corner and it's not rounded at the top. And then just smoothing it around to start frosting the top portion of the cake. It doesn't have to be perfectly smooth at this point because we are going to smooth it out later. But right now we're just going for an even layer. And right now I'm really focusing on the top half of the cake. Okay, so I have an even layer of buttercream there. Now I'm going to go back and focus on the bottom half of my cake here. So just working with a little bit at a time of buttercream because there's no need to have a big chunk because then it's just so much harder to control. So just working in little patches. So if I have, say, a couple tablespoons of buttercream here, I'm not going to try to spread that around the entire cake. I'm just going to work in patches. So I have like a little bit of buttercream here. And then I'm just going to adhere that to the cake and then just work just in this little section instead of trying to smear it all the way around. Just trying to cover the cake in a nice even layer of buttercream. I'm going to continue around the cake to do the bottom half. Again, doesn't have to be perfectly smooth, just a nice even layer. My buttercream is nice and soft. It's spreading smoothly. And should be ready to go here soon. I see a couple little holes here, so I can go back in now. You can see there's a little bit of cake showing down there. So I'm going to go back and fill that in just a bit. And kind of give it a once over with my little offset spatula here. You could use a medium offset spatula, but for this little 6-inch, I actually really like my smaller one. Just kind of filling in those holes. It's better if you're newer to cake decorating, it's better to start off with a little bit more frosting at this point, and then to try to smooth it out and add more later. So you can go ahead and go for a little bit of a thicker coat if you have to, or if you're newer. And then when we go to smooth it out, it'll be a little bit easier than having to try to add back frosting over and over. So like I said, we just wanted the cake is covered, not perfect, but nice and even, a thick layer of buttercream. So now I have my trusty icing smoother here. You could use a bench scrape. This one in particular has a comb on one side. I'm going to use the straight edge here, and I'm going to place that against the side of my cake right here. And it's nice because it has this nice like squared off corner where it's going to fit in right here on my cake board, and my cake is going to help the sides of my cake stay really nice and straight. So I'm going to gently place it here, and then give the cake turntable like one large rotation all the way around. So I like to do these slow, large rotations instead of spinning really fast. So I like to keep it pressed right here and then do one big giant rotation. Just do a couple of these really big ones up first, just to get things going. And then cleaning off my tools in between. I'm just going to keep going here. You can see it starts to smooth out. You don't have to go so fast. Actually, the slower if you go a little bit slower and have a little bit of pressure on that smoother, it's going to pick up excess frosting, and then it's going to put it back and fill in those little holes. So you don't want to go too fast, or else you'll miss that. All right, we're getting there. Now I know it's not perfect, so what I'm going to go back and do, you can see how there's some little holes in here and there. Before I go too crazy with the smoothing, I'm going to go back and fill those back in. If you're seeing any major holes, but you know it's not really going to smooth out or get too much better with the icing smoother, you can go back in and fill it in. Whoops, got a couple crumbs showing. That's why it's so important to do a crumb coat. Okay, let's go back in with our icing smoother, a couple big rotations again, see if we might be able to smooth out those little holes that I was having. You want to make sure you have a little bit of pressure, but you're not pressing so hard. You want to smooth, not scrape. So you want to smooth out that buttercream by adding a little bit of pressure, but not so much that you're scraping all of it off either, or else you'll end up just stripping the cake of all of its icing. But yeah, you can see I do have some crumbs, but like I said, that's the importance of a proper crumb coat that we kind of had to skip over today. But now you can see, had we chilled that cake, more of those crumbs would be nice and hidden in our first layer. We'll go back in. I'm not going to spend crazy amount of time right now working on this, but I'm just trying to give you guys all the tools and knowledge so then when you go back to smooth out your cakes at home, you have some tips to try out next time. So we won't go too crazy covering everything. Plus, we're going to cover this cake, the bottom half at least, in sprinkles. So if you are newer to cake decorating and you're struggling to get your cake super smooth, of course, practice always helps, but things like sprinkles definitely help jazz it up and might even hide some of our little flaws. So clean this off. Let's do a couple more times, and then I'll walk you through how to finish off the top of the cake again. Getting there. Let's do one more little pass, just because I know you can see some of my little holes too. So we want to do our best here, right? Without, spending too much time going back and forth. Do this a couple more passes, see if you might be able to get the rest of that smoothed out. All right, let's move on to the top of the cake. Again, like I mentioned in the crumb coat, that we really want to take advantage of the fact that when we smoothed out the sides of the cake, some of the icing got smushed and went up the sides of the cake, and now we have this big lip, which I think is a good thing when you are trying to focus on creating that nice crisp top edge, so we don't have any of those droopy corners. So again, I have my cleaned off offset spatula here. I'm going to take it at the edge here and then gently pull towards the center. And it's really important that we clean off that spatula off between each time we do this, or else we're just adding frosting to that edge that we really want to make nice and clean. So just a very light hand here, pulling that towards the center. And then no need to rush this part. And then from here, so I make sure that the top is super flat, we're going to take our icing smoother again, gently place it on top of the cake, very gently, and then give it a spin. My turntable's a little rickety today. Hopefully yours is not. Let's do that one more time. Nice and flat on top. Now, of course, that kind of pushed some of the icing over the edges just a little bit. So we're going to do one more time, saving just for last. One more time, big swoop around. So, and there we go. We are going to move right along to adding the sprinkles on the bottom of our cake here, and then we'll get to that buttercream border just in time for our class. So I have a big bowl of sprinkles here, and I have a sheet pan, which was holding all my tools. So we're going to scoot those out of the way. And then I'm going to hold the cake over the sheet pan and scoop from the bowl and then press them to the side of the cake. You got to do this when the cake is nice. They're freshly frosted, so it still has some stick to it. And then doing so over my sheet pan here means that it's going to catch anything. So it's going to means I can reuse them and keep them from going totally everywhere. So I'm going to do that over my sheet pan, and I'm just going to use my hand to just press those against the edge here. They're still going to bounce a little bit, but it'll catch most of them. And I just have an assortment of sprinkles here. A lot of people always ask me, like, what sprinkles do you use? Well, I have so many at home that I just end up using like an assortment of rainbow sprinkles. So for this one, I have like several different types of sprinkles, and just all in nice rainbowy pastel colors, all different shapes and sizes. And I think it's really fun that way to kind of mix and match your own. So I just like to do this. It's very organic. It's very random. Just kind of popping them on the bottom here. And then you can go back in and fill it in as you see fit. I'm going to, while I'm over my bowl, just scrape off any of these extra floating butter or sprinkles that ended up on my cake board, just to kind of clear those out. I had to put those back in the bowl. Whew. That sound, sprinkles rolling around the kitchen. Thankfully, most of them are ending up back in this bowl and in my sheet pan. But it sounds like a party, right? Okay, so that's that for our little sprinkle border. If you wanted to be meticulous or perfect about this, you can go back in. If you wanted like a gradual drift, and like that's kind of how I had it in my picture. Like it was heavy on the bottom and then, you know, sprinkled all the way up. So what I would do is just kind of stick them on. Like I said, the buttercream is still nice and fresh. So you can kind of go back in and fill in any holes. Just with a clean finger, they should usually stick. Or if you have sprinkle tweezers, you can sprinkle tweeze those in to make it look as perfect or perfectly imperfect as you want. We're not going to go through the whole thing, but if you wanted to do it like that, you can. I'm going to give my hands a quick wash or rinse. And then I'm going to quickly get into our rainbow buttercream border. So I'm going to move the cake actually out of the way and then line up our cameras here for you guys. Oops, that's not the one. Making sure the cake is not sitting right in front of the camera like it was. Okay, so we have all the buttercream that we saved from before. I have some buttercream left in my bowl that I'm going to go ahead and scrape out and add to that. So we have enough buttercream. And what I'm going to do is, I've seen so many different variations of a piped rainbow. And sometimes, and I've done it several ways myself, you'll take 6 different colors, put them in piping bags, put them all in one piping bag, or 6 different bowls, dye them all up. So this little technique I'm going to go through right here keeps us from having to have 6 bowls of 6 different buttercreams and 6 different piping bags just to go back and put them all in one. So because it's a rainbow and all the colors are going to be next to each other anyway, I'm going to put them all in one bowl. And I'm going to go ahead and kind of divide this up. It's like not perfectly into 6, but enough for my different colors. So then I'm going to take my food coloring here. I have some toothpicks and I'm going to, well, let's just, it's a little bit easier. I'm going to give each, like, wouldn't be quadrant since there's 6, but each 6 section, a little bit of food coloring from the rainbow. So I have my green, my blue, making sure we go in rainbow order here. A little bit of purple. I'm just going to do drops of coloring because it's a little bit faster. If you want to make sure you have the perfect color, you can use a toothpick, and then that just kind of controls how much color you're adding. And so you want to make sure you're not getting like a big dollop of pink. But for time's sake today, we're just going to go for it with the food coloring. And these are gel-based food colorings. I love them so much more than like traditional food coloring that's very liquidy. The color is more concentrated and they're much more vibrant. And they're not adding any liquid back into your buttercream. So from here, like I said, I wanted to do this all in one bowl. So I have each, like I said, each little quadrant here has its own color. And because they're all going to go next to each other anyway, it's okay that they start to touch. And in fact, we kind of want that to happen, right? It's kind of this blended rainbow effect. So I'm going to go around my bowl, creating these different colors. And it's nice because you don't even have to switch spatulas either, because we're going in a rainbow order. So I'm gonna keep going. And then we are going to put all of these in one piping bag together to pipe that rainbow rope across the top. Lost some frosting there. Okay. So this should be purple. You guys get the idea now, right? And this is an American-based whipped buttercream, so it takes on color very easily. I love Swiss Marine buttercream because it's nice and silky and smooth, but it's just not as good at taking on these bright, vibrant colors. All right, last color is green. So again, this was kind of my take on mixing our color palette all in one bowl without having to dirty 6 different bowls, 6 different piping bags, 6 different spatulas. And I think it worked out pretty cool, right? Where's your shot? There you guys go. So we have all of our buttercream there. And then I have my piping bag fitted already with a star tip at the bottom. And what I'm going to do is I have a cup here, a glass. I'm going to put my piping bag in the glass. And then I'm going to open it up so it's standing in the glass. And that's because I'm going to be putting all of the colors into the piping bag, kind of doing like in sections. This is going to free up my hands to make it just a little bit easier. And they're nice and smooth. Okay. So again, I'm going to go around the bowl. I'm going to start with yellow, I think is where I started dyeing. So I'm going to take my yellow, actually going to switch to an offset spatula just because it's a little bit thinner here. It's a little bit thinner than the spatula. And so I can kind of, I'm going to stripe it through the piping bag here. So I'm going to gather up the yellow. And then I'm going to go ahead and stick it all the way to the bottom and then stripe it up the side of the bag here. And because it's going to be this like rainbow blendy effect, it doesn't have to be perfect. We're just going up the bag with our yellow, and then we'll move on to our pink. It's going to go right next door. Or sorry, move on to our yellow. But we got to make sure we save enough room for all 6 colors. So as I'm doing this, let me just thank you guys again for joining me on this lovely Saturday. It's lovely here in Vancouver, at least. Hopefully it's lovely where you are. I really enjoy these types of classes, and I will be offering more live classes like this moving forward with Style Suite. So if you're here, that means you already signed up on our mailing list or on our newsletter. So as those classes are announced, you will get your emails for those if you want to sign up. This one was fun. There was no registration, but future classes you will have to register. And coming with that, there'll be much smaller classes, a little bit more intimate, and we'll get all the recipes and instructions ahead of time. So you'll have everything ready to go. And then we'll be doing these classes where you guys will be baking along with me at home. So that's what's coming up for me on Style Suite. So I hope you guys will join me. And you guys are the first to know about those classes. So moving on to purple. Go and get those in there. So if that excites you, keep an eye out for your inbox. We're gonna be adding more and more classes. Likely cake, you know I love cake. Cookies, because hello, delicious, but all other sorts of classes too. And if you're interested in a macaron class, I have a macaron for our monthly recipe for our Patreon group for March. So if you aren't part of our Patreon group and you're really interested in being part of the Style Suite Bake Club over there, you can find us at patreon.com/stylesuite. And this month's recipe is macarons, but you can go back and see all the recipes that we did the last 6 months. We've been baking up a storm over there, and you can get videos for those lessons as well. Okay, all our colors are in. Let's go. So I'm going to hold up my bag. So get ready to take it out of the cup. And then I'm going to squish those colors down towards the bottom to get all that air, get any air bubbles out. And then I'm going to give it a little test swirl on the side to get things going. Okay, so we have all our colors in there, the colors of the rainbow, they're all striped together. And now I'm going to do a rope border around the top edge of the cake. And so for the rope border, I'm going to keep the piping bag here at a 45-degree angle. And I'm just going to do continuous coils as I spin the cake. So continuous pressure on that piping bag. I'm just doing coils all the way around while spinning. And if you run out of steam on your piping bag, like I'm squeezing here, that's okay. You can stop, push it down, reassess, and then just pick up right where you started. And then it just, all those colors just come out in that rainbow effect. And I think it's just so cool. And then try to connect that last one right there. All right, guys, there's our rainbow sprinkle cake. We have that our rainbow border with the star tip. That technique for the one bowl, I think, is pretty cool. We have our sprinkles around the bottom. You guys can scatter those up the sides, like if you want to be just like the picture that we did. One last thing, because I like to finish off with this type of shot. Let's do over here. Oh, actually, let's keep that camera. We'll do one slice inside, just so we can see the inside and all those perfectly even layers that we work so hard to do. Time for the big reveal. Rainbow sprinkle cake, guys. We did it. Thank you so much for joining me today. Again, if you are on our newsletter list, which you should be if you are here today, keep an eye out for future classes. They are coming very soon, right here from my kitchen to yours. It's going to be a great time. The classes will be more intimate. So it's not going to be, you know, anyone that can fit into our Zoom. So if you didn't fit in today, but hopefully you catch this on the replay, but we're going to do much more intimate classes where you guys get all the recipes ahead of time. We're going to work our way through that. It's going to be so much fun. So be on the lookout for that. Check us out on Patreon, and I will talk to you guys later. Thank you so much. Have a great Saturday.